The 1960s were an era of innovation in the car industry, with manufacturers experimenting with bold designs, new technologies, and futuristic concepts. However, not all experiments were successful. Some cars were simply ahead of their time, poorly designed, or just plain silly. Let's dive into the 13 worst and silliest cars from the 1960s from around the world that missed the mark. The Ford Taunus P3, produced between 1960 and 1964, is one of the most distinctive vehicles to come out of Ford's European operations. Its unusual shape and design earned it the nickname Badewanne, or bathtub in Germany, a reference to its smooth, rounded, and somewhat bulky body contours that resembled the curved sides of a tub. Though it was an attempt at modern futuristic design, the result was a car that looked more comical than cutting edge, making it a memorable oddity in the automotive world. At first glance, the Taunus P3 stood out from its contemporaries with its oval-shaped body and unorthodox proportions. It was a significant departure from the more angular and boxy cars that dominated the 1960s. The designers aimed to introduce sleek, flowing lines that would make the car appear modern and aerodynamic. However, the exaggerated curves and bulging fenders gave it an almost cartoonish look. The oval headlights paired with the round, pod-like front grille gave the car a wide-eyed expression, further contributing to its slightly goofy appearance. The Taunus P3's body shape was not just for show, though. It was part of a design philosophy that sought to emphasize smooth aerodynamics and maximize interior space. The car's large, round windows provided excellent visibility, and its spacious cabin was a practical benefit for drivers and passengers. Inside, the Taunus P3 was surprisingly roomy for its class, with enough headroom and legroom to make it a comfortable family car. This focus on practicality was one of the car's strong suits, though it was often overshadowed by its quirky exterior. Another notable feature of the P3 was its minimalist approach to ornamentation. Unlike many of its competitors, which were laden with chrome trim and intricate detailing, the P3 embraced simplicity. The clean lines and lack of excessive decoration were part of its attempt to look modern and forward-thinking. Unfortunately, this stark minimalism only accentuated the car's odd proportions, making the bodywork appear even more bulbous and ungainly. Under the hood, the Ford Taunus P3 offered a range of engines that were relatively modest in power. It was available with small displacement four-cylinder engines, which provided adequate performance for daily driving, but nothing remarkable. The focus of the car was not on high performance, but rather on practicality, fuel efficiency, and reliability. In this regard, the Taunus P3 was a solid performer, as it was relatively easy to maintain and offered good fuel economy for its time. Despite its oddball appearance, the P3 was a reasonably successful car in terms of sales, particularly in Germany and other parts of Europe. Ford's marketing efforts emphasized the car's modernity and practicality, and for many buyers, the bathtub design was not a deterrent, but rather a curiosity. It represented a bold step into a new era of automotive design, one that prioritized aerodynamics and simplicity over traditional, more ornamental styles. However, the car's futuristic design did not age well. By the mid-1960s, more angular and aggressive car designs were becoming the norm, and the Taunus P3's soft round lines began to look dated. What had once been seen as innovative started to appear out of place in a rapidly changing automotive landscape. This ultimately led to the car being replaced by the more conventional Ford Taunus P4, which returned to a boxier and more familiar design. Today, the Ford Taunus P3 is remembered with a mix of affection and amusement. It is celebrated as a daring experiment in design, even if it did not achieve long-lasting success or widespread admiration. Car enthusiasts often regard it as a charming oddity from an era when automakers were willing to take risks and push the boundaries of conventional styling. The bathtub nickname, while not entirely flattering, has become an enduring part of the car's legacy, cementing its place in automotive history as one of Ford's most unusual creations. In conclusion, the Ford Taunus P3 was a car that stood out for its unusual, rounded design that earned it the nickname bathtub. While it was intended to be a futuristic modern car, its odd proportions and lack of ornamentation made it look more awkward than sleek. Despite this, it found a niche in the market as a practical and spacious family car, and it remains a quirky, memorable vehicle from the early 1960s. The Simca 1000, produced from 1961 to 1978, is remembered as one of the more peculiar designs to emerge from the post-war European car market. It was intended to be a practical, affordable car for the masses, but its boxy and toy-like appearance left much to be desired. The Simca 1000's awkward, square proportions and somewhat uninspiring aesthetic made it look more like a child's toy than a serious automobile, and its lack of refinement in both design and performance relegated it to the list of forgettable vehicles from the 1960s. At first glance, the Simca 1000 was a small, compact car with very basic lines. Its most noticeable feature was its boxy shape, with a tall roof line and squared-off edges. The front of the car was plain, with a small rectangular grille and round headlights that gave it a somewhat expressionless face. The car's proportions seemed off. It had a short wheelbase, narrow track, and tall profile, which made it look out of balance and contributed to its toy-like appearance. The overall design was utilitarian, aimed more at function than form, but the end result was a car that lacked any real visual appeal. The car was designed to be an economical option for European families, with Simca positioning it as a rival to other small cars of the time, such as the Renault Dauphine and Fiat 600. However, where its competitors had a certain charm or quirkiness, the Simca 1000's design failed to spark much enthusiasm. The flat body panels, simplistic lines, and complete absence of flair or character made the car look generic and uninspired. It didn't have the aerodynamic curves or stylish features that many other cars of the 1960s were starting to adopt. One of the most criticized aspects of the Simca 1000 was its poor handling. Its rear-engine, rear-wheel drive layout, similar to the Renault Dauphine, could have been a positive feature. Still, in the Simca, it led to erratic handling characteristics. The car was prone to oversteering, especially when driven at higher speeds, making it somewhat unpredictable on the road. This problem was compounded by the car's lightweight and narrow frame, which gave it a feeling of instability. For drivers seeking confidence and safety behind the wheel, the Simca 1000 fell far short. Another major issue with the Simca 1000 was its underwhelming engine performance. Early models were powered by a small, water-cooled four-cylinder engine that produced a modest 35 horsepower. While this may have been acceptable for a lightweight city car, it struggled on highways and hills, offering sluggish acceleration and low top speeds. The lack of power meant that the Simca 1000 was not a car that could deliver any kind of exciting or engaging driving experience. It was built for practicality and economy, but even in those areas, it failed to shine compared to its peers. Reliability was also a significant concern for the Simca 1000. Owners often reported frequent breakdowns, and the car became notorious for needing constant repairs. Issues with the engine overheating, the gearbox failing, and the car's electrical system malfunctioning were common complaints. The lack of durability added to the car's reputation as a cheap, unreliable vehicle, which turned off potential buyers. Over time, these problems became well known, further diminishing the car's appeal and resale value. Despite these shortcomings, the Simca 1000 did have a few redeeming qualities. It was compact and easy to maneuver in crowded European cities, which made it popular among urban drivers who needed a small, affordable car. Its small size also meant that it was relatively fuel efficient, and it offered more interior space than one might expect from such a tiny vehicle. The rear engine layout allowed for a decent amount of trunk space in the front, which was a useful feature for families or commuters. However, these practical advantages were overshadowed by the car's unattractive design and lack of mechanical refinement. As the years went on, Simca attempted to modernize the 1000 by offering more powerful engines and minor styling tweaks. But the car never really escaped its reputation as a cheap, underwhelming vehicle. Even as more modern and sophisticated small cars entered the market, the Simca 1000 retained its toy-like appearance and poor driving dynamics. By the time production ended in 1978, It was clear that the Simca 1000 had become outdated, a relic of a bygone era of car design that had never fully worked. Today, the Simca 1000 is often remembered with a mix of nostalgia and bemusement. For some, it represents the practical, no-frills approach to car design in the 1960s, while others view it as an example of missed potential. Its boxy, toy-like appearance and lack of refinement, both in handling and reliability, ensured its place as one of the more unremarkable cars of its time, though it continues to have a quirky charm for collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate oddball vehicles. The NSU Prince 4, produced from 1961 to 1973, was an oddball car from the German manufacturer NSU, which was known for its innovative engineering, but in this case, the design and performance missed the mark. The Prince 4 was a small rear-engine compact car with awkward proportions that made it stand out for all the wrong reasons. Its diminutive size, narrow track, and unbalanced body made it look like a shrunken version of more substantial, better-designed vehicles, giving it an odd, almost toy-like appearance. The car's design was heavily influenced by the trends of its time, with NSU aiming to offer an affordable and efficient small car to compete with other European compacts like the Fiat 500 and the Volkswagen Beetle. However, instead of coming across as charming or stylish like its competitors, the Prince 4 ended up looking awkward and unrefined. The car's overall proportions were one of its most jarring features. It was very short and narrow, with a tall profile and a squarish, upright design that seemed more suited to a child's pedal car than a real vehicle. Its tiny, thin wheels and tires, designed to minimize rolling resistance and improve fuel economy, only added to the clumsy aesthetic. At the front, the NSU Prince 4 had a boxy, minimalist appearance with a small, flat grille and round headlights that looked almost comically oversized relative to the rest of the car. This created a somewhat bug-eyed look, further emphasizing the car's toy-like feel. The flat, plain body panels and upright windshield added to the uninspired design, making the car seem more functional than fashionable. In contrast to the flowing lines and curves that were becoming popular in car design during the 1960s, the Prince 4 looked rigid and blocky, as if the designers had focused more on squeezing as much utility as possible into the smallest footprint rather than creating something aesthetically pleasing. One of the major factors contributing to the car's odd proportions was its rear-mounted engine. This layout, which was also used in the Volkswagen Beetle, allowed for more interior space and a compact design. But in the case of the Prince 4, it resulted in strange weight distribution. The rear-heavy design made the car look unbalanced, especially when viewed from the side. The rear of the car appeared to sag under the weight of the engine, while the front end seemed disproportionately light and high. This gave the Prince 4 an awkward stance, making it appear as though it was struggling to stay upright. Performance was another area where the NSU Prince 4 failed to impress. The car was powered by a small air-cooled two-cylinder engine that produced around 30 horsepower, which, while not unusual for a compact car of the era, left it feeling underpowered and sluggish. The car struggled to reach highway speeds, and its top speed was just over 70 miles per hour, which was inadequate for anything beyond city driving. The lack of power combined with the rear engine layout made the car difficult to handle, especially at higher speeds or on winding roads. The skinny tires and simple suspension system didn't help matters, leading to a bumpy, uncomfortable ride that made the Prince 4 feel cheap and unrefined. Inside, the car was Spartan and cramped, with basic materials and minimal features. The dashboard was simple, with a few essential gauges and controls, and the seating was narrow and uncomfortable, reflecting the car's focus on economy rather than comfort. While the interior space was adequate for a city car, it lacked the refinement and thoughtfulness found in other small cars of the time, such as the Mini or Fiat 500. The lack of attention to detail in both the interior and exterior design further emphasized the car's utilitarian nature, leaving little to excite potential buyers. Despite its shortcomings, the NSU Prince 4 did have some positive qualities. It was inexpensive to buy and run, which made it an appealing option for budget-conscious buyers in Europe during the post-war economic recovery. Its small size made it easy to park and maneuver in crowded urban environments, and its fuel efficiency was decent for the time. However, these advantages were overshadowed by the car's awkward design and underwhelming performance. Unlike the Fiat 500, which became iconic for its charming design and peppy driving dynamics, the NSU Prince 4 remained largely forgettable and failed to achieve widespread popularity. The car's awkward proportions, sluggish performance, and clumsy handling made it difficult to compete with more stylish and better engineered small cars of the era. NSU eventually ceased production of the Prince 4 in 1973 as the company shifted its focus to more advanced vehicles like the NSU Row 80, which featured the innovative Wankel rotary engine. The Prince 4, however, remains a quirky footnote in the history of compact cars. A car that tried to offer practicality but ended up looking out of place on the roads of the 1960s, the Pontiac Tempest Le Mans, produced between 1961 and 1963, was an ambitious and experimental car that attempted to push the boundaries of automotive engineering. However, despite its innovative ideas, the Tempest Le Mans became known more for its quirks and failures than its successes. Introduced as a compact, sporty option for Pontiac's lineup, it aimed to appeal to buyers looking for performance and style in a smaller, more affordable package. Unfortunately, the car's unconventional engineering, combined with design flaws, mechanical issues, and a mismatched aesthetic, hindered its overall appeal. One of the most notable features of the Pontiac Tempest Le Mans was its unique drivetrain design, particularly its flexible drive shaft, which was referred to as a rope drive. This design allowed the car to have a front-mounted engine with a rear-mounted transaxle. The intention behind this was to improve weight distribution and handling, which in theory would result in a smoother ride and better performance. The flexible drive shaft itself was an unusual innovation, made from a single piece of curved steel that connected the engine to the rear transaxle. It was designed to flex and absorb vibrations, which was supposed to reduce drivetrain noise and harshness. However, the rope drive proved to be one of the car's biggest flaws. While innovative, the design was overly complicated and not entirely reliable. The flexible drive shaft often led to significant mechanical problems, including vibration issues, poor power transfer, and frequent transmission failures. These issues made the Tempest Le Mans difficult and expensive to maintain, tarnishing its reputation among buyers who expected durability and performance. The car's unorthodox engineering was ahead of its time in some ways, but the execution fell short of delivering the reliability that American car buyers were used to. In addition to its mechanical challenges, the Tempest Le Mans struggled with its design and styling. Although Pontiac marketed the car as a sporty, compact alternative to its larger models, the Le Mans suffered from a somewhat mismatched aesthetic. Its body was oversized for what was meant to be a smaller car, with bulky proportions that gave it a heavy and awkward look. The wide, flat front end and large grille were reminiscent of larger Pontiacs, making the car appear more like a downsized version of a full-size sedan rather than a truly nimble, compact car. The heavy, blocky appearance clashed with the car's supposed sporty intentions, leaving it looking ungainly and out of step with other stylish compacts of the early 1960s. On the performance front, the Tempest Le Mans was also underwhelming. While the car was available with various engine options, including a 4-cylinder and a more powerful V8, neither option could fully compensate for the car's weight and mechanical limitations. The 4-cylinder engine, in particular, was noted for being rough and underpowered, which only added to the car's reputation for offering a subpar driving experience. The rear-mounted transaxle, while intended to improve handling, did not make up for the sluggish acceleration and lack of agility that drivers encountered. The interior of the Tempest Le Mans was another area where the car failed to live up to expectations. While it offered decent space for a compact car, the materials used in the interior were not particularly high quality, and the overall design lacked the refinement and luxury that buyers expected from Pontiac's Le Mans nameplate. The seating and dashboard layout were functional but uninspired, and while the car included some modern amenities for its time, it failed to stand out in a competitive market that was becoming increasingly focused on both style and substance. Despite its faults, the Tempest Le Mans did pave the way for future Pontiac innovations, particularly in the performance sector. The Le Mans name would eventually be revived and become synonymous with Pontiac's high-performance cars, especially with the introduction of the GTO in 1964. However, the early 1961 to 1963 Tempest Le Mans remains a reminder of Pontiac's experimentation phase, when the company was willing to take risks in terms of both engineering and design, albeit with mixed results. The Tempest Le Mans' complex engineering, coupled with its heavy, unrefined appearance and numerous mechanical issues, ultimately overshadowed any potential it may have had as a sporty compact car. While the flexible drive shaft concept was an interesting idea, it was simply too ahead of its time and lacked the reliability needed to make it a success. The car's styling and performance fell short of what buyers were looking for, and its hefty maintenance costs further sealed its fate as a flop. Today, the 1961 to 1963 Pontiac Tempest Le Mans is remembered more for its peculiarities than its performance, standing as an example of an ambitious idea that never quite hit the mark. The Renault Fors, produced from 1961 to 1994, was an iconic but unconventional car that became a symbol of practicality and affordability. Despite its long production run and widespread popularity, the Renault Fors design was often seen as quirky, if not outright strange. The car was a product of post-war Europe, where practicality and cost-effectiveness were prioritized over aesthetics, and the Renault Fors embodied this ethos with its boxy, utilitarian design. The first thing that stood out about the Renault Fors was its shape. With its tall, boxy body and small wheels, the car had proportions that were far from graceful. The high roofline made the car look somewhat like a minivan or a compact delivery vehicle, rather than a typical passenger car. Its slab-sided body, squared-off edges, and lack of any real curves gave it a utilitarian appearance that could be described as goofy, especially when compared to the more streamlined, stylish cars of the 1960s. The Renault Fors looked functional above all else, as if it had been designed with a ruler rather than an eye for elegance. The car's tiny wheels only added to its odd proportions. Positioned under the broad body and high roof, the wheels appeared comically small, giving the car an unbalanced, almost toy-like appearance. While these small wheels were practical for city driving and contributed to the car's lightweight design, they did little to help the Renault Fors' awkward stance. Combined with its relatively high ground clearance, the car looked more like a utility vehicle than a compact car intended for everyday drivers. It was as though the car had been built to traverse rough farm roads rather than zip through European cities, though its actual use was often the opposite. The Renault Fors front end was also a point of contention. The car featured a simple, unadorned grille and round headlights, which gave it a somewhat bug-eyed look. This unpretentious face lacked the refinement or aggressiveness seen in many other cars of the era, making the Renault Fors appear friendly, if not a little goofy. The overall impression was that the car didn't take itself too seriously, which in some ways became part of its charm. It was a car designed for utility, not for turning heads at the showroom, and in this respect, it succeeded. However, despite its appearance, the Renault Fors was a highly functional vehicle, and its design choices, while odd, were often practical. The tall roofline, for example, provided excellent headroom and made the car surprisingly spacious on the inside. This was a significant selling point, especially in Europe, where compact cars were common but often lacked interior space. The Renault Fors' boxy shape allowed for a flexible, roomy cabin that could comfortably accommodate passengers and cargo alike. The car's simple construction also made it easy to manufacture and repair, contributing to its affordability and longevity. One of the Renault Fors' defining features was its versatility. It was designed to be a blue-collar car, affordable for farmers and workers, and its robust design allowed it to handle various terrains. The car was available in several configurations, including a 2-door, 4-door, and even a panel van version. This adaptability helped cement its reputation as a workhorse, particularly in rural areas, where its simple mechanics and reliability were highly valued. Its quirky design, while not conventionally attractive, became a hallmark of its utilitarian nature. Despite its practicality, the Renault Fors never really escaped its image as an odd-looking vehicle. In an era where sleek, aerodynamic designs were becoming more popular, especially with the rise of compact and sporty cars, the Renault Fors' boxy appearance felt like a relic from an earlier time. While other automakers were focusing on performance and style, Renault had produced a car that prioritized functionality above all else, and the design reflected that choice. As a result, the Renault Fors was often seen as unremarkable, if not downright silly, in comparison to its flashier contemporaries. Nevertheless, the Renault Fors' quirky, utilitarian design became part of its enduring legacy. Over its 3-decade production run, the car sold over 8 million units worldwide, becoming a staple in countries ranging from France to South America. Its odd appearance may have initially turned heads for the wrong reasons, but over time, the Renault Fors' practicality, reliability, and affordability endeared it to millions of drivers. The car may not have been stylish, but it got the job done, and that was what mattered most to its loyal fan base. In the end, the Renault Fors is remembered not just for its peculiar design, but for its role as a reliable, versatile vehicle that served millions of people around the world. While its boxy body and awkward proportions might have earned it a place among the more goofy-looking cars of the 1960s, the Ford Temps 400e, produced from 1957 to 1965, was a van that prioritized practicality over aesthetics, though its design left much to be desired in terms of visual appeal. Its boxy, utilitarian body resembled something more akin to an oversized kitchen appliance on wheels than a sleek, modern vehicle. With its awkward proportions and clunky appearance, the Temps 400e never really captured the imagination of car enthusiasts, and it was often criticized for its uninspiring design. The first impression of the Temps 400e is that it was all about function, with little regard for form. The van had a very angular, rectangular shape, which gave it a blocky and somewhat inelegant appearance. Its flat front end, dominated by a large rectangular grille and round headlights, gave the vehicle a somewhat blank and expressionless look, as though it was a machine designed solely for work, rather than something that might turn heads on the road. The design lacked the kind of detailing or curves that might have made it more attractive or visually interesting. Instead, the 400e was all about maximizing interior space, with a high roof and a long body that made it look like a box on wheels. In keeping with its utilitarian nature, the Temps 400e had a simple, no-frills interior that reflected its role as a work vehicle. It was built to carry cargo and people efficiently, not to pamper its occupants with luxury or advanced features. The interior design was Spartan, with basic seating and minimal dashboard features, contributing to its image as a purely functional van. The driving position, perched high up behind the flat windshield, gave the driver a commanding view of the road, but did little to improve the overall experience of being inside the van. It was a working vehicle in the truest sense, designed to get the job done, not to make the journey enjoyable. The van's awkward, top-heavy proportions further detracted from its visual appeal. The Temps 400e's tall, narrow body gave it an ungainly stance, which made it look somewhat unbalanced, especially when compared to more streamlined vehicles of the time. The small wheels tucked under the wide body added to its cartoonish appearance, making it look more like an oversized box than a carefully crafted vehicle. This disproportionate look may have been practical from a cargo space perspective, but it certainly didn't do the van any favors in terms of style. In terms of performance, the Temps 400e was not much better. The van was powered by a small engine that provided just enough power to haul cargo, but it was far from quick or responsive. Its handling was equally uninspiring, with the van's large body and relatively small wheels, making it feel cumbersome and unwieldy, especially when fully loaded. The Temps 400e was known for its lack of refinement, with a rough ride and limited power that made driving it more of a chore than a pleasure. It may have been functional for light commercial use, but it certainly wasn't designed with driver enjoyment in mind. Despite these shortcomings, the Temps 400e found a niche as a practical, reliable van for small businesses and tradespeople in post-war Britain. Its large cargo area and relatively low cost made it an attractive option for those who needed a vehicle that could carry goods and equipment, even if it lacked the polish and refinement of more expensive models. It was a workhorse built for durability and functionality, and in that regard, it succeeded. However, it never managed to shake off its awkward, appliance-like appearance, and it was often overshadowed by more stylish and better-performing competitors. The Temps 400e's design did evolve slightly over its production run, with various configurations including panel vans, pickups, and minibuses, but the basic blocky shape remained the same. The van's versatility helped it stay in production for nearly a decade, and it was often used as a delivery vehicle, an ambulance, or a light commercial van. However, no amount of functionality could mask the fact that the Temps 400e was not a visually appealing vehicle, and its lack of power and refinement made it a less than desirable choice for those seeking more than just basic transportation. In the end, the Ford Temps 400e stands as an example of a vehicle that sacrificed style for function. And while it served its purpose as a practical, affordable van, its clunky, unattractive design prevented it from achieving widespread popularity. It was a reliable, hard-working vehicle that filled a niche in post-war Britain, but it will always be remembered more for its awkward, boxy appearance than for any groundbreaking innovations or performance achievements. The Temps 400e may not have won any beauty contests, but it carved out a place for itself in automotive history as a dependable, if visually unremarkable, work van. The Schmidt KR200, produced from 1955 to 1964, was a quirky, three-wheeled microcar that truly stood out on the roads of post-war Europe. Originally designed by the German aircraft manufacturer Messerschmitt, the KR200 looked more like a tiny airplane than a traditional car, a fitting legacy from a company that had been making fighter planes during World War II. With its narrow fuselage-like body, transparent bubble canopy, and three-wheel design, the KR200 became an iconic oddity of its era, equal parts toy-like and futuristic. One of the most striking features of the Messerschmitt KR200 was its appearance, which was more akin to a small aircraft than a car. The narrow, elongated body resembled the fuselage of an airplane, reflecting the vehicle's origins. Designed by Messerschmitt engineer Fritz Fend, the KR200's compact size and lightweight construction made it an ideal vehicle for the fuel-strapped, recovering economies of post-war Europe. Its transparent dome canopy, which could be lifted to allow entry, added to the aircraft-like feel, making drivers look like they were piloting a small personal craft. The KR200 was a direct descendant of the KR175, Messerschmitt's first foray into microcars, but the KR200 refined the design and became far more popular. The three-wheeled design of the KR200 was one of its most unusual aspects. With two wheels at the front and one at the rear, the car was extremely narrow, giving it a somewhat precarious look. The thin profile helped it zip through narrow European streets, but it also made the car look somewhat unstable, although it was surprisingly agile. The single rear wheel provided propulsion, while the front two wheels were responsible for steering. This configuration, paired with the car's extremely light weight, around 500 pounds, allowed the KR200 to be reasonably nimble for such a small and unconventional vehicle. However, its strange proportions and three-wheeled stance made it appear more like a rolling toy or an experimental vehicle than a serious mode of transportation. Another aspect that added to the Messerschmitt KR200's unique aesthetic was its bubble car design. The clear plastic dome canopy was a distinctive feature, offering an almost panoramic view of the outside world and making the driver feel more like a pilot than a car driver. This cockpit-like feature was an unmistakable nod to Messerschmitt's aircraft heritage, making the KR200 stand out from other microcars of the time, many of which had more traditional enclosed cabins. The bubble canopy also gave the KR200 a futuristic, space-age look, aligning with the mid-20th century's fascination with science fiction and technological advancement. It was both playful and innovative, but also impractical in certain weather conditions. Drivers had to lift the canopy to get in or out, which wasn't ideal in the rain. The interior of the KR200 was just as unconventional as its exterior. There was no steering wheel. Instead, it used a handlebar-like control similar to what you might find in an airplane cockpit. This again emphasized the vehicle's connection to Messerschmitt's aeronautical roots. Seating was tandem style, with the driver sitting in the front and the passenger directly behind, making the car extremely narrow and contributing to its streamlined, airplane-like profile. The seating arrangement made for an intimate driving experience, but also limited the car's practicality in terms of space. Despite its size, the car was surprisingly sturdy and could achieve modest speeds of up to 60 miles per hour, powered by a tiny two-stroke engine that was often found in scooters. While the KR200's design was certainly eccentric, its performance was surprisingly functional for a microcar. The car was powered by a 191 cubic centimeter single-cylinder engine, capable of producing around 10 horsepower, which was sufficient for urban driving at the time. The rear-wheel drive configuration gave the car decent handling for city streets, though its lightweight frame made it vulnerable to strong winds and uneven roads. Despite its toy-like appearance, the KR200 had a good reputation for reliability, and its simplicity made it relatively easy to maintain. However, it was never going to be a high-performance vehicle. Its appeal lay in its economy, uniqueness, and ability to maneuver in tight urban environments, not in speed or power. The Messerschmitt KR200 was never intended to be a mainstream vehicle. It was born out of necessity in a post-war period when resources were scarce and people needed affordable, efficient transportation. Its design, though odd by today's standards, was a reflection of the times, minimalist, forward-thinking, and focused on functionality. The KR200 was a symbol of ingenuity in the face of adversity, and while it might have looked more like a small airplane or a futuristic bubble than a traditional car, it met the needs of the people who bought it. The Austin A40 Finina, produced from 1958 to 1967, was a peculiar vehicle that became well known for its unusually high roofline and stubby wheelbase. These design elements gave it a quirky, almost refrigerator-like appearance, which was a stark contrast to the sleek and stylish cars emerging during the late 1950s and 1960s. The A40 Finina's boxy proportions and awkwardly tall stance made it a visual oddity, earning it a place among some of the most unconventional cars of its era. The A40 Finina marked an important shift in automotive design for Austin, as it was one of the first cars designed by the renowned Italian designer Pininfarina. The collaboration was intended to bring a fresh, modern look to Austin's range, but the results were mixed. While the A40 Finina was certainly functional, its aesthetics left something to be desired. The high roof and upright stance made the car look top-heavy, which was compounded by the relatively short wheelbase. This combination resulted in a car that looked slightly out of balance, with the body towering over the wheels, which gave it a clumsy, disproportionate feel on the road. One of the defining features of the Austin A40 Finina was its boxy body shape, which was a departure from the more curvaceous car designs of the 1950s. While Pininfarina was known for creating elegant, streamlined cars for brands like Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, the A40 Finina was a much more utilitarian affair. Its sharp angles, flat panels, and high roofline were practical in terms of interior space, but visually it didn't quite hit the mark. The car's tall design gave passengers more headroom, which made it relatively comfortable for its size, but it also made the A40 Finina look awkward next to the more sleek, low-slung cars that were popular at the time. The A40 Finina's awkward appearance was only accentuated by its relatively small size. While the car was compact, the high roof and upright stance made it appear larger and bulkier than it actually was. Its short wheelbase and relatively narrow track width gave it an almost cartoonish look, as if the car's designers had stretched the roof but forgotten to extend the rest of the body. This made the A40 Finina look somewhat ungainly, especially when compared to the more refined cars of the era. It lacked the aerodynamic flow and visual harmony that many of its contemporaries boasted, making it an oddity on the road. Despite its strange looks, the Austin A40 Finina had some redeeming qualities. It was a practical car, offering a surprising amount of interior space for its size, and it was affordable for the average family. The tall design meant that there was ample room for passengers, and the rear of the car could be used for carrying luggage or groceries. In fact, the A40 Finina was available in both saloon and estate versions, with the latter offering even more cargo space, which made it a popular choice for families who needed an affordable and functional car. The A40 Finina was also notable for being one of the first hatchbacks, as the estate version featured a split rear door that could open like a tailgate. This design feature was ahead of its time and would later become common in small cars. However, this practicality did little to offset its awkward appearance, and the A40 Finina's looks continued to be a subject of debate among car enthusiasts. While it may not have been the prettiest car on the market, its innovative design did influence future hatchback models, helping to shape the way small cars were designed in the decades to come. From a performance standpoint, the Austin A40 Finina was fairly modest. It was powered by a small 4-cylinder engine, which provided adequate power for city driving, but it was far from a sporty car. The engine was economical, which made the A40 Finina an appealing option for budget-conscious drivers, but its lack of power meant that it struggled on highways and steep inclines. Its handling was also somewhat affected by its unusual proportions, as the high roof and narrow wheelbase could make the car feel unstable in sharp turns or at higher speeds. This contributed to its reputation as a practical but unexciting car to drive. In terms of its legacy, the Austin A40 Finina is remembered more for its oddball design than for its performance or innovation. While it was an important car for Austin and played a role in the development of future hatchbacks, its awkward proportions and refrigerator-like appearance have made it a standout example of mid-20th century automotive design gone awry. Today, the A40 Finina is often regarded with a mix of fondness and bemusement, appreciated for its quirky charm, but not exactly celebrated for its beauty. In the end, the Austin A40 Finina was a car that prioritized practicality over style, but its unusual design left it looking like a relic from a different era, even in its own time. The Hillman Husky, produced between 1958 and 1963, was a compact estate car designed with practicality in mind, but its ungainly appearance has made it more memorable for its awkward design than for its capabilities. The car's square shape and stubby proportions gave it an ungraceful, almost shrunken delivery van look, which stood in contrast to the more elegant lines of many cars from the late 1950s and early 1960s. Despite its utility and practicality, the Husky struggled to make an impression in the style-conscious automotive world. One of the most striking features of the Hillman Husky was its boxy, squared-off body, which emphasized function over form. The upright, angular design made it ideal for carrying goods, with plenty of headroom and a large, flat cargo area in the rear. However, the car's lack of aesthetic refinement was hard to ignore. It looked awkward and disproportionate, especially with its short wheelbase and the flat vertical lines that dominated its profile. The Husky appeared to be almost a miniature version of a commercial van, which earned it a reputation as a practical workhorse, but certainly not a design icon. The front end of the Hillman Husky was just as clunky as the rest of the car. The rounded yet bulky grille seemed tacked on to the front of an otherwise flat, square nose, giving the car a somewhat mismatched and unbalanced look. The large round headlights only served to amplify this visual awkwardness, creating the impression of a car that was more functional than fashionable. The Husky's short hood and lack of sleek lines added to its utilitarian appearance, making it a car that was clearly built for a specific purpose, but without much attention to style. Its overall dimensions added to its awkward stance. The car was compact, but it didn't have the nimbleness or the sleekness associated with many other small cars of the era. Instead, its high roofline and broad flat surfaces gave it an ungainly top-heavy appearance, as if the designers had focused solely on maximizing interior space without regard for the car's exterior proportions. This made the Husky look less like a small family car and more like a vehicle meant for carrying loads or making short deliveries around town, further cementing its workhorse image. Despite its clunky appearance, the Hillman Husky was relatively practical and versatile. Its estate design made it useful for small businesses or families that needed extra cargo space, and it was reasonably affordable for its time. The rear tailgate opened to reveal a flat and spacious loading area, which was one of its primary selling points. The high roofline also allowed for ample interior space, making it easier to transport larger items. This practicality ensured that the Husky had a niche following among those who valued function over form. However, this emphasis on utility didn't do the Hillman Husky any favors in terms of its overall appeal. While other manufacturers were producing stylish small cars with curvier, more dynamic designs, the Husky's rigid, almost industrial aesthetic made it seem out of step with the times. Its proportions were too squared off, its lines too harsh, and its overall shape too awkward for it to be considered attractive, even by the standards of the relatively conservative estate car market. The car's mechanical aspects were fairly unremarkable as well, with a small four-cylinder engine that offered modest performance. The Husky wasn't particularly fast or agile, which only added to the impression that it was more of a utility vehicle than a car designed for enjoyable driving. It did have decent fuel economy, which was a plus for the budget-conscious buyers of the time, but its performance did little to elevate it from the realm of the mundane. In terms of handling, the Hillman Husky was adequate for its intended purpose, but it wasn't a car that offered much driving excitement. Its short wheelbase and relatively simple suspension system provided a firm, somewhat uncomfortable ride on uneven surfaces, and its cornering ability was far from impressive. The Husky was best suited to short trips around town, where its practicality could shine, but it lacked the refinement needed for longer journeys or more spirited driving. The Hillman Husky's ungainly appearance and lackluster performance ensured that it never really achieved mainstream success or a lasting place in automotive history. While it did fulfill its role as a practical, affordable estate car, it was quickly overshadowed by more stylish and better-performing models. Today, the Husky is remembered primarily for its quirky, ungraceful design and its niche role as a utilitarian vehicle in an era when most car buyers were starting to expect more style and sophistication from their cars. Despite its shortcomings, the Hillman Husky holds a certain charm for collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate its no-nonsense approach and its awkward, slightly comical looks. The Gaga Mobile Dart, produced between 1959 and 1961, is one of the most whimsical and peculiar cars to ever hit the road. Manufactured in Australia by Buckle Motors, the Dart was based on the German Gaga Mobile microcar, but took an even more minimalist approach. With its ultra-lightweight fiberglass body, open-top design, and compact dimensions, the Dart looked more like a life-size toy or a soapbox racer than an actual roadworthy vehicle. The most distinctive aspect of the Gaga Mobile Dart was its small, curvaceous body. The car measured just over 3 meters long, with a body that had no doors, no windows, and barely any roof. Its tiny stature and streamlined shape made it stand out, giving it the appearance of a toy car for adults. In an era when cars were becoming larger and more luxurious, the Dart's diminutive size and lack of typical car features made it a stark contrast to the automotive trends of the late 1950s and early 1960s. The Dart's front end was simple, with a low, rounded nose that featured 2 small headlights set wide apart, giving the car an almost cartoonish face. The lack of a conventional grille or hood further contributed to its toy-like look, while the small, smooth curves of the body made it look more like a fun, casual vehicle than a serious contender in the automotive world. Its open-top design, with no provision for a permanent roof, made it look almost as though it was built for a soapbox derby rather than public roads. With its tiny 300cc or 400cc two-cylinder engine, the Gaga Mobile Dart was not exactly a powerhouse. It offered a maximum speed of around 60 miles per hour, 97 kilometers per hour, but its feather-light weight of just 345 kilograms meant that it didn't need much power to move. Despite its low output, the Dart's tiny engine was enough to give it a zippy, go-kart-like feel on the road. However, the lack of a roof or any real weather protection meant that driving it was limited to fair weather fun. This playful, impractical nature made the Dart more of a novelty or weekend cruiser than a car for everyday use. The car's interior was just as Spartan as its exterior, with only the bare essentials. The seats were little more than thinly padded benches, and the dashboard was minimal, with a few basic gauges and controls. The overall feel of the car was one of simplicity, with no frills or luxuries to distract from the sheer joy of driving. The Dart embodied a sense of carefree fun, but it lacked the comfort or refinement that most car buyers of the time were looking for. Because of its unusual design and limited practicality, the Gaga Mobile Dart never achieved mainstream popularity. However, it did find a niche following among enthusiasts who appreciated its quirky charm and fun-loving spirit. The Dart was more about the experience of driving a lightweight, open-air car than about practicality or performance. Its small size made it ideal for zipping around city streets or cruising along the coast, but it was far from a car that could handle long trips or inclement weather. Despite its flaws, the Dart has become something of a cult classic over the years. Its toy-like proportions and cheerful appearance have earned it a place in the hearts of microcar enthusiasts, and its rarity makes it a sought-after collector's item today. The Gaga Mobile Dart is a reminder of a time when car manufacturers weren't afraid to experiment with unconventional designs, even if it meant creating something that looked more like a soapbox racer than a traditional car. In many ways, the Gaga Mobile Dart is a reflection of the optimism and playfulness of the post-war era. It was a car built not for utility or practicality, but for fun. Its unusual design, tiny size, and open-top configuration made it a vehicle that stood out wherever it went, earning it a place in the annals of automotive history as one of the most unique cars ever built. Though it may not have been practical, the Gaga Mobile Dart's charm and novelty ensured that it would always be remembered as one of the most delightfully quirky cars of its time. The DAF 33, produced from 1967 to 1974, was one of those cars that epitomized utilitarian design, focusing on function rather than form. Hailing from the Dutch automaker DAF, the vehicle was an evolution of earlier models in the brand's lineup, designed with practicality and affordability in mind. Yet despite these virtues, the car's aesthetic left much to be desired, and its performance was far from exciting. In an era when automotive designs were becoming increasingly sleek, powerful, and stylish, the DAF 33 stood in stark contrast with its no-nonsense, boxy shape. The first thing one would notice about the DAF 33 was its diminutive size and awkward, square profile. Its upright, rectangular body lacked the flowing curves or aggressive lines that defined many other cars of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Instead, it appeared utilitarian, like a small, economical workhorse for city streets. This blocky shape, while functional, did little to inspire excitement or admiration. If anything, it made the car look somewhat out of step with its contemporaries, as if it belonged to a different, less glamorous automotive era. The front end of the car was a particular point of contention for design enthusiasts. The DAF 33 featured a small, flat grille, flanked by modest round headlights, giving it an almost comically simplistic face. It lacked any bold or dynamic visual elements, and the flat, unremarkable hood only added to the sense that the car was designed more for practicality than for any sort of aesthetic appeal. Unlike many vehicles of its time, which were starting to emphasize style and personal expression, the DAF 33 seemed almost utilitarian to a fault, focused solely on getting drivers from one place to another with minimal fuss. From the side, the car's short wheelbase and small wheels gave it an almost toy-like appearance. The vehicle's proportions were somewhat awkward, with the body towering over its wheels, making the car seem slightly unbalanced. This design may have worked well for maneuverability in tight European cities, but it did nothing to enhance the car's visual presence on the road. It was, quite simply, unremarkable. Many automotive critics of the time remarked that the car looked more like a small appliance on wheels than a proper automobile. And while it served its purpose as a compact, city-friendly car, its looks left much to be desired. One of the more unique aspects of the DAF 33 was its drivetrain, particularly the variomatic transmission. This continuously variable transmission, CVT, was quite innovative for its time, allowing the car to operate without traditional gear shifting. For those not comfortable with manual transmissions, the variomatic was a godsend, offering smooth, continuous power delivery without the need for changing gears. However, while the CVT was technically impressive, it did little to improve the car's overall performance. With a tiny 746 cubic centimeters, two-cylinder engine producing just around 32 horsepower, the DAF33 was severely underpowered, even by the modest standards of compact cars of the era. Acceleration in the DAF33 was sluggish at best. The car struggled to reach highway speeds, and while it was perfectly adequate for city driving, it lacked the power and responsiveness that made driving enjoyable. The variomatic transmission, though innovative, only highlighted the car's lack of horsepower. At higher speeds, the engine droned as the transmission kept the car in its most efficient power band, but it didn't deliver any sense of excitement or engagement. For those accustomed to the more visceral, engaging driving experiences offered by sportier cars of the time, the DAF33 must have felt like a disappointment. The interior of the DAF33 mirrored the car's exterior in its simplicity. Stepping inside the vehicle was like entering a world where frills and luxury didn't exist. The dashboard was sparse, featuring only the most essential gauges and controls. The materials used in the cabin were cheap, and the seats, while functional, were hardly comfortable for long journeys. The car's small size meant that interior space was limited, making it less than ideal for families or anyone looking for a more spacious ride. However, for drivers seeking an affordable, no-frills car, the DAF33 offered just enough practicality to meet basic needs. The car's small stature and tight turning radius made it ideal for city driving, and in that context, it excelled. Parking the DAF33 was a breeze, thanks to its compact dimensions, and navigating narrow European streets was a task it handled with ease. For urban commuters on a budget, the DAF33 was a practical choice, and its simple mechanics made it easy and inexpensive to maintain. But outside of city streets, particularly on highways or long-distance journeys, the car's limitations quickly became apparent. The Moskvich 408, produced between 1964 and 1976, was a Soviet-made compact car that embodied the no-frills, utilitarian approach to vehicle design common in the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. The car was meant to provide an affordable and practical means of transportation for the masses in the Soviet Union, but in many ways it failed to stand out, both aesthetically and in terms of performance. At first glance, the Moskvich 408's design was extremely basic. Its angular, square-shaped body was devoid of any curves or dynamic lines, which made it look more like a moving box than a car designed for the open road. The styling was functional at best, but it lacked any sort of flair that would have made it appealing to the eye. Compared to its Western contemporaries, which were moving towards sleeker, more aerodynamic designs, the Moskvich 408 felt outdated even upon its release. Its boxy, almost clunky silhouette might have been adequate for utilitarian purposes, but it certainly didn't capture the imagination of drivers looking for something more than just a mode of transportation. The front of the car was dominated by a pair of round headlights and a simple rectangular grille, both of which were devoid of any embellishments. The overall effect was plain, and while this simplicity may have been a deliberate choice to keep manufacturing costs low, it contributed to the vehicle's reputation as bland and uninspiring. The lack of attention to aesthetic detail was apparent in every angle of the car, from its flat sides to its uninspired rear end. It was designed with practicality in mind, but this also meant that it completely ignored the stylistic trends of the 1960s, when cars were becoming increasingly expressive and sleek. One of the main criticisms of the Moskvich 408 was that it appeared outdated almost as soon as it hit the market. While the West was experiencing the golden age of car design, with iconic models like the Ford Mustang and Chevrolet Corvette making waves, the Moskvich 408 felt trapped in an earlier era. It was a car that did little to evolve the design language of its time, with a rigid adherence to utility over style. The result was a car that appeared more suited for the post-war period of the late 1940s than the mid-1960s, when automotive design was in full swing globally. While the exterior was plain, the interior of the Moskvich 408 followed suit. It was Spartan, to say the least, with a bare minimum of controls and a dashboard that seemed as if it was designed purely out of necessity. The seats were basic and lacked the comfort that was becoming standard in many Western vehicles of the same era. The interior materials were often criticized for feeling cheap, and overall, the inside of the car reflected the austerity of its external appearance. In keeping with the utilitarian philosophy of the Soviet automotive industry, comfort and luxury were sacrificed in favor of functionality and simplicity. Beyond its lackluster design, the Moskvich 408 also suffered from reliability issues, which only added to its poor reputation. The car was powered by a 1.4-liter, four-cylinder engine, which produced a meager 50 horsepower. This modest power output, combined with the car's uninspired driving dynamics, made it sluggish on the road. Acceleration was slow, and the car struggled to reach and maintain highway speeds, making it more suited for short, local trips than for long-distance travel. While it was adequate for daily commutes in Soviet cities, it lacked the power and refinement that drivers elsewhere in the world were beginning to expect. Adding to its performance woes, the Moskvich 408 was notorious for being mechanically unreliable. Owners frequently reported issues with the car's engine, transmission, and electrical system, leading to a reputation for frequent breakdowns. The combination of poor reliability and lackluster design ensured that the Moskvich 408 would never be remembered as an automotive icon, despite its widespread production and use across the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries. Another notable drawback was the car's poor fuel efficiency, which combined with its sluggish performance, made it a less than ideal choice for those looking to save on running costs. In an era when fuel economy was becoming more important, particularly in Western markets, the Moskvich 408 fell behind. This was less of a concern in the Soviet Union, where cars were often designed more for durability than for efficiency, but it nonetheless contributed to the overall dissatisfaction with the vehicle. Despite these criticisms, the Moskvich 408 had a role to play in the Soviet Union's automotive landscape. For many, it was their first car and a symbol of independence. It offered a sense of mobility that had previously been out of reach for many Soviet citizens, particularly those outside of major cities. However, this sense of mobility came at the cost of comfort, reliability. The Panhard PL-17, produced between 1959 and 1965, is often remembered for its unconventional and quirky design that stands out among the many vehicles of its era. This French car was unique in many aspects, and its bulbous, rounded shape was a stark departure from the more angular designs popular in the 1960s. With its front end resembling an inverted shell, the PL-17's distinctive styling evoked a sense of whimsy, making it look like something out of a cartoon rather than a serious automobile. One of the most striking features of the Panhard PL-17 was its rounded body. The design was highly aerodynamic, but it also resulted in a car that appeared almost bulbous, lacking the sharp lines and sleek contours that characterized many of its contemporaries. This rounded profile not only contributed to its quirky aesthetic, but also affected the car's practicality, as the shape made it feel less spacious than other vehicles in the compact segment. The overall effect was a car that felt playful and lighthearted, but also somewhat impractical for everyday use. The headlights of the PL-17 were another hallmark of its design. Positioned high on the front end and resembling large bug-like eyes, they contributed to the car's cartoonish appearance. This design choice was certainly unique, but it did little to enhance the car's overall appeal, often leaving onlookers puzzled. The headlights' placement also had functional drawbacks, as they did not provide the best illumination compared to other cars of the time, leading to safety concerns in low visibility conditions. Beneath its whimsical exterior, the Panhard PL-17 was innovative in several ways. It featured a lightweight construction using a combination of aluminum and steel, which helped improve fuel efficiency and handling. This engineering approach was quite progressive for its time, showcasing Panhard's commitment to producing a vehicle that was not only distinctive in design, but also functional. The car was powered by a flat twin engine, providing a modest amount of power while contributing to the vehicle's lightweight structure. However, while it was relatively efficient, the engine's performance left much to be desired compared to its more powerful rivals. The interior of the PL-17 was equally unorthodox. It featured a simple and straightforward dashboard with a focus on functionality rather than luxury or style. The seating was comfortable but basic, offering limited amenities. While the interior was practical, it lacked the charm that some of its contemporaries offered. The use of unconventional materials and layouts further emphasized the car's quirky character, making it feel unique but not necessarily appealing to all buyers. Despite its innovative engineering and quirky design, the Panhard PL17 struggled to compete in a market increasingly dominated by more conventional designs in larger manufacturers. While it had its share of dedicated fans, the car's bulbous appearance and cartoonish features made it a hard sell in a world that was shifting towards more streamlined and practical vehicles. Its reputation as a playful oddity ultimately overshadowed its strengths as a practical compact car. In the broader context of automotive history, the Panhard PL17 represents a fascinating chapter in the evolution of car design. It stood out not just for its unconventional look, but also for its engineering ingenuity. The car's innovative use of lightweight materials and its focus on efficiency were ahead of its time, laying groundwork for future compact cars. However, the unique aesthetics that defined the PL17 also limited its mass appeal, making it a niche vehicle in the crowded automotive market of the 1960s. Today, the Panhard PL17 is remembered as a charming and quirky classic that appeals to collectors and enthusiasts of vintage cars. Its odd design and playful character continue to evoke curiosity and nostalgia among those who appreciate the eccentricities of automotive history. While it may not have achieved commercial success, the PL17 remains an enduring symbol of creativity in car design and engineering during a transformative era in the automotive industry. These cars from the 1960s may have aimed for innovation, but they missed the mark with odd designs, awkward engineering, or both. While they may have been practical for some purposes, their silly and often unattractive appearances have earned them a special place in the annals of automotive history.